Alright, so I want to talk about this thing today. This is a 2003 Toyota Solara. So today is going to be a part one of probably a few videos posted up to YouTube about this particular vehicle. If you like this content and would like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. It would really help me out in obtaining that first 1,000 subscribers that YouTube requires to be able to monetize the channel and help me be able to do more cool videos like this and or get equipment to improve the quality of the videos. So what's going on with this car today? Well, let me put the key in here for you. As you can see, it's got 294,437 miles on it. Now, the thing that happened with this car was the other day, I was getting ready to drive into work. I started it up while the car was in park. There was a couple thunks that came from the engine, and you kind of felt the thunks throughout the car. You just felt this instant like boom, boom, coming from the engine bay, the front end of the car. And I didn't think anything of it. I put the car in reverse. It was raining that day, and I drove probably a few blocks away from home, and the temperature gauge was all the way up at the hot. So I pulled off of the side of the road, and in the following picture, you'll see what happened. Now that's not fog in the headlights there. That is actually burning radiator fluid after the car overheated on my way into work when this problem first occurred. So the next day I came out to the car to start it up, to be able to pull it in the driveway and take a more thorough look at it. I turned the key and I heard the belt squealing and squeaking, and the engine was running pretty rough. So I made a U-turn, pulled into the driveway. By the time that I got into the driveway, the rough running conditions had stopped, and I didn't notice any coolant stains on the ground because that prior night when I had the issue of it overheating going to work, it was raining pretty hard and a lot of the engine components were wet and the ground underneath the car was already wet. So I couldn't really tell whether or not it was leaking from any place or what was going on. So I decided to pop the hood and see what was going on underneath the hood. So I figured this car having that many miles on it, when I got the car, the radiator had a big crack across the top, and being a beater car, you usually don't go replacing a whole bunch of parts on it, because then you end up running into other problems with it, such as parts breaking, or you end up doing a huge job on it, and that particular one system in the car works great, but everything else on the car is a pile of junk. So I did just the radiator and the cap, and I was good for about 30,000 miles. So I figured it's time to replace the thermostat, and having heard the belt squealing, I figured it was time to also replace the water pump. And I figured since I'm going to do all of that, why not replace the tensioner pulley? That shouldn't be a big problem, right? So after having driven the car for a couple days thinking that everything was fantastic with it after I put those new parts in it, I came out because I was about ready. I had enough faith in the car that I'd be able to drive it back and forth to work with no issues. So I came out to start up the car, and it seems to be running pretty good right now. But one of the things that I found out that particular day, which was yesterday, that the engine was running really, really rough. The engine was actually shaking in place. So I did the thing that I have got going on right now. I popped the hood, and the engine was shaking all over the place for maybe about a minute, and then the shaking went away. So I decided to investigate a little bit further, and I found that the radiator had even less fluid in it, and the coolant reservoir was a lot fuller than I had originally left. So what you can see in this video is bubbles coming up into the expansion tank for the cooling system. That kind of alarmed me because as you can see how full the tank is. When I originally finished doing the water pump and the thermostat, I left the reservoir tank at the full mark for the cold, which is pretty low in the expansion tank. So I found the radiator pretty low and I found the expansion tank pretty full and pumping out bubbles. So a quick backstory on the car. I got the car for free from a friend who was having some problems with it, being that it's a higher mileage car. I got the car for free probably about 3 years ago with 30,000 miles less on the odometer. So I got a fair few miles on it for a little bit of work that I had to do to it. At the time that I got it, it had a big old crack across the top of the radiator. So I replaced the radiator. Most people would probably do the water pump and the thermostat along with some hoses when they do the radiator. But this car, I decided at that time, was going to be my commuter car, just a beater car. So if it leaks a little bit of power steering fluid, or if the pulley on the bearings on the water pump are just a little bit loose, it's not quite worth tearing into anything and risk breaking some plastic clips or hurting some of the connectors for some of the harness and the plugs and things. So it really wasn't quite worth it, and I think that most people's theory on a commuter beater car is pretty much the same. You don't want to go into tearing a bunch of things apart and breaking a bunch of things and causing yourself even bigger headaches than just something that's slightly loose or slightly leaky. So I threw a new radiator in it, got quite a few miles out of it, and I felt safe, as you can see here in the next portion of the video, by looking at the dipstick, that the oil's not milky white. I did not pull off the oil cap because the engine was running at the time this video was taken. But as you can see, the oil there, it looks pretty clean. I mean, obviously it's dirty, but there doesn't appear to be any like milky whiteness from when coolant tends to get into the oil. So I felt pretty safe that, hey, it's an older car with a lot of miles on it. The thermostat was probably stuck, and the following day when I started it up after it overheated, there was a squealing from the belt as well. So I figured, you know what, why not? Let's do the water pump. Let's do the thermostat. It's only about, I want to say I paid somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 to $170 to get the parts. And I also replaced the tensioner pulley while I was in there because, again, the car's got a lot of miles on it. And rather than having to tear all this stuff apart a second time to replace the tensioner pulley at a later date, I figured I'd do it all in one sitting. So as you can see, I'm letting the car warm up a little bit. I'm going to come out here in a little while after it's cooled back down. Maybe what that'll do is the additional pressure in the cooling system will cause the water to leak into the cylinders, and maybe I'll pull a couple spark plugs and see if there's a lot of coolant in the engine. And if there is, that'll confirm it. If not, I may have to order a kit from Amazon to be able to take a look at those bubbles and see what's going on out here. Now again, in this particular scene, the engine's a little bit too loud to be able to hear my voice speaking here, but this was in scene with everything else. I just pulled the car up into the driveway, and I guess that was enough to get the cooling system to start bubbling again into the reservoir. So I talk about it for a moment here. As you can see, it's bubbling. It's not bubbling quite as much as it did the day before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the engine off and let it sit for a little while now that it appears to be warm enough to hopefully duplicate some of the problems that I had. And I'm going to go ahead and pull the spark plugs out in a little bit and see if they're wet, and then I'll start it back up and see how it runs, see if it shakes again. And then if everything appears to be leading in the direction of a blown head gasket, I'll order the kit off of Amazon to be able to test those bubbles and see if their exhaust gas is getting into the cooling system. Alright, so let's shut this thing off and let it cool for a little while. Alright, so one of the checks that I want to do is I'm going to take off the little plastic cover. I'm going to pull the 4 coils out and then take each spark plug out and take a look down inside it. I'll take a look at the end of the spark plugs to see if there's any noticeable coolant on it. And then what I'll do is I'll take a look, turn the flashlight on my phone, and look down inside of each spark plug hole and see if there's any accumulated coolant inside of any of the holes on there. And we'll go from there. Alright, so I got the first spark plug out, and it appears to be clean and dry. So I'm going to take the other spark plugs out too, and we'll see what they look like. Again, that one looks pretty clean and dry. Let's take out the next one. Again, clean and dry. Now this last one kind of smells a little bit funny and doesn't look nearly as clean as the rest of them. So let's go ahead and look down inside of the spark plug holes too. Alright, so this is the first spark plug that we took out. You can see the top of the piston down there. It looks dry. There's a little bit of a, was it carbon buildup? That looks pretty dry. Oh boy, not very much in the way of light down there. Again, this is number 2. It appears to be dry, a little bit of carbon buildup. Number 3 is quite a ways down there inside the hole, but it doesn't appear to be wet. So, let's take a look at number 4. You can see shiny. Oh boy, come on, focus. It's one of the problems with using a phone here is there's no manual focus. So it looks kind of wet down there. I'm not entirely sure if that's any proof of a leak, but we'll go ahead and take a look a little bit later and see what other tests we can do on this and try and figure out if we truly have a leaking head gasket or a problem with the head. Alright, so I'm going to put the spark plugs back in and take a look at the fluid level inside of the radiator. Start it up for a minute, listen to hear how it runs, and then we'll go from there. Alright, so I got it all put back together. There's a little bit of pressure still built up in there. Let's take a look at here inside of the radiator. Let's get my flashlight out. And that appears to be a bit low. So, that's what I'm going to have to do, because these results were a little bit inconclusive today as to specifically what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and order a gas tester kit from Amazon and check, or try to check, what the air bubbles were coming up through that expansion tank, the coolant expansion tank. And when those come in, I'll go ahead and record that process and post it up on YouTube. So these are some of the block tester kit and head gasket test kit that's available on Amazon to be able to test those air bubbles and see if it's actually exhaust gases that I plan on ordering. So now I got it all put back together. Let me go ahead and start it up here. I don't know if you were able to hear it right there in the beginning. It ran just a little bit rough when it first started up, and it's smoothing out right away. I don't know if you were able to quite catch that. Alright, so I started it up there, and I don't know if you were able to hear that through the microphone, or tell that it ran a little bit rough when I first started it up, but it did smoothen out a little bit once it ran for a few seconds. So let's pull the cap here on the radiator real quick. I didn't let it run very long. There's already pressure, even though I just had the cap off a moment ago. And you can see, when I got my flashlight here, you can see it's kind of low in there, but there appears to be above the full mark. You got the low and then the full mark there on the expansion tank. So is what I'm going to do is I'm going to order the exhaust gas tester kit from Amazon and see if we can find out what those bubbles are that keep popping up in the expansion tank, and figure out whether or not this engine here has a head gasket leak or head or block problems, and go from there. If you like the video so far, if you want to see more, or hopefully get notifications on additional videos associated with this car, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you have any suggestions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. Hope you tune in for the next video. Thank you.